You are not walking down an aisle lined with flowers. You are being delivered like a parcel sealed in wool and silence. Today, you are the bride, but the wedding is not for you. Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a world of cold stone floors, smoky hearths, and whispered prayers stitched into woolen seams. You are about to become a medieval bride. There is no wedding planner, no venue deposit, no Pinterest mood board filled with candlelight and cake ideas. Instead, there's a goat bleeding somewhere beneath your window, a vague scent of boiled cabbage in the air, and an anxious knot forming deep in your stomach. This is your wedding day, and you probably won't survive this, with your sanity fully intact. Before we begin, if you find these stories relaxing or interesting, you can like, subscribe, share the video, or leave a comment to support the channel. Every bit of encouragement gives me the motivation to keep making videos every single day. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Let's begin. You wake to a house already stirring. The fire is half lit, glowing faintly beneath the soot-blackened pot. Outside, the frost is thin but sharp, the kind that settles into the marrow of the floorboards. Your blanket smells faintly of lanolin and thyme. You sit up slowly, careful not to tear the hem of your shift on the splintered bed frame. There is no excitement in the air, no laughter, no squealing cousins or spilled wine. The women in your household move like ghosts through linen and steam. A bowl of water is placed in front of you, cool but not cold. You wash without being told. The cloth is scratchy, and your face feels tight with winter. A hand descends on your shoulder briefly. Your aunt, perhaps, pressing not with comfort, but with warning. There is no time to dawdle. Not today. Your hair is pulled and braided until your scalp tingles. The ribbons are reused, faintly stained, but still bright. The dress, well, it's not yours. It belonged to a girl from 3 winters ago, one whose name is now spoken with a mix of envy and pity. It fits imperfectly. The fabric creaks under your arms. It smells faintly of the chest it came from, cedar and damp wool, with a strange undertone of fennel. You are not allowed breakfast. A crust of bread is handed to you, but taken away before you finish. A light stomach makes for steadier feet, they say. And besides, it's bad luck to eat before you're truly someone's wife. Outside, the sounds of preparation grow louder. A clatter of pots, a snapped twig, footsteps in the mud. You try to catch your breath, but the air tastes metallic, like iron and memory. Someone mutters a prayer you can't quite hear. Another checks the knot on your belt, fussing over whether it rests on the correct side. Superstition drapes over you as heavily as the veil soon will. And yes, there is a donkey waiting. He's tied near the gate, already shifting his weight and showing the whites of his eyes. No one explains, but you know the meaning. The donkey is not for luxury. He is there so the village can see you upright, unlimping, unswollen. A bride who arrives on foot might be accused of hiding something. A bride who falls from the donkey is ... discussed. The road through the village is wet with old snow and older gossip. You pass neighbors who nod without smiling, eyes flicking toward your belly, then your ringless hand, then the groom waiting at the chapel door. You do not meet his eyes. You saw him once briefly when the contracts were exchanged. He is neither young nor old, neither cruel nor kind. He is the man you will answer to now, and that is enough. The chapel is colder than the street. The walls breathe old damp. The candles flicker with protest. You kneel where you're told, stand when you're nudged, and try not to lose count of how many times the priest says sacramentum. The ceremony is mostly Latin, and the words fall around you like sleet, formless, chilling, uninvited. You feel your fingers tremble when the ring is slipped on. It is plain, too large. It slides to the second knuckle and stays there, like a weight more than a circle. The priest blesses it. The congregation exhales. You are no longer yourself. Weddings among the medieval peasantry were legal acts, yes, but also social theater. The church played its role, but the true currency exchanged was between families, dowry, goods, land, honor. You are part of that trade, wrapped in linen and custom. Your silence is considered assent. Your stillness virtue. Historians still debate how much choice medieval girls truly had. Some argue that communities allowed a surprising degree of informal consent. Brides could nod, frown, even walk away. Others believe those gestures were symbolic at best, and the cost of refusal was too high to consider real. The truth, perhaps, lies in the subtle tension between expectation and escape. Once the ceremony ends, there is no cheering, only nods. The priest disappears behind the curtain. A woman you do not know adjusts your veil and murmurs that your cheeks look pale, which is good pale is chaste. You are led outside. The donkey is gone. In his place is a litter of muddy children kicking at a chicken. Somewhere, a dog begins to bark. The world has resumed as if nothing happened. But something did. You stepped into a new name, a new silence, a new weight that will settle across your shoulders in ways you do not yet have the words for. You walk beside your husband now, but not close enough to touch. The path leads back through the village, where the windows seem to blink slower than before. It is your wedding day, and you are going home. The house you return to is not unfamiliar, yet nothing inside it quite belongs to you. The air is warmer than the chapel, but the warmth feels borrowed, as though the fire has been told to behave for your arrival. The walls do not greet you. The hearth does not recognize your footsteps. You step inside and become smaller. You are shown where to sit, and so you sit. The bench is worn but sturdy, the kind of wood that's seen more arguments than laughter. Your veil is lifted and carefully folded, not by your husband, but by his sister, who does not meet your eye. You notice that your cup has already been filled ale, thin and sour. Your place at the table has already been carved out. You slot into it with barely a sound. The food arrives slowly, in steaming bowls and wooden plates passed from hand to hand. You are handed bread, stew, and a piece of cheese hard enough to test your molars. You chew without tasting. The noise of the room moves around you, but not through you. People speak, laugh, cough, clatter. You remain still. Stillness today is safest. The feast is not lavish, but respectable. The kind meant to show neighbors that your new family can provide. There is no roast pig, no musicians. Just lentils, cabbage, bread, and a pie that contains more onions than meat. The dessert, if one can call it that, is a heavy cake studded with raisins so dry they seem surprised to be noticed. You are not expected to entertain. That would be bold. But you are expected to smile lightly, modestly, as though you are a lamp someone forgot to snuff out. Too much cheer would draw comment. Too little, suspicion. You nod at jokes you can barely hear. You laugh once at something about the village miller and the ladder. You are not sure what the punchline was. The wine is poured, a toast is made. You are toasted too, though the words are more for form than feeling. Someone lifts a cup and remarks that may your womb be as fruitful as your mother's pantry. A few laugh. Your mother-in-law does not. She watches you like someone watches a fire that's too close to dry thatch. The men speak more freely now. One recalls a wedding where the bride fainted during the vows. Another tells a story about a runaway goat that ended up in the bridal bed, though whether this is metaphor or memory, no one clarifies. You keep your face arranged. It is no longer entirely your own. You begin to notice who doesn't speak to you. The cousin who smirked when you were introduced. The neighbor who asked, too quickly, whether your family still had that bit of land near the river. The boy who winked and was elbowed by his father. Their silence feels louder than the room. Somewhere behind you, a woman begins to sing. It is not a love song. It is a working song, something about flax and rain and a husband who leaves his boots by the fire. A few women join in, softly. The room quiets slightly. You pretend to drink, but your cup remains full. Medieval marriage feasts were rarely about romance. They were contracts performed in public, displays of alliance rather than affection. The food was a sign of honor, the guest list a reflection of status. What mattered most was not what was said, but who was seen saying it. Beneath the bench, your feet ache. The shoes are borrowed, the soles worn smooth. You curl your toes, trying to remember if you've spoken more than 10 words since morning. You don't think you have. That's not a failure. That's wisdom. The candles begin to burn low. The children are pulled away from scraps of bread and sent to their pallets. A few of the older guests begin to rise. The priest, who had stayed only long enough to bless the table, is already gone. The laughter fades, though the ale still flows. And then, with no announcement, the room quiets. Someone coughs. Someone clears their throat. You know what comes next. You are led upstairs. Not alone, never alone, but escorted by 2 women who smell of rosewater and smoke. They fuss over your hair, which has already loosened, and remove the ribbon without asking. One straightens your shift. The other mutters something about a blessing. You are not sure if it's meant for you or for the bed. The room is simple. A pallet of straw and cloth. A bowl of wine left near the door. A candle nearly spent. The blanket is freshly laid and still creased. There are herbs scattered beneath the pillow time, fennel, and something bitter you cannot name. Their scent rises softly. Downstairs, there is murmuring. Nothing loud, just enough to remind you that there are ears below. This is not just a room. It is a stage. There was a time when some villages turned this moment into spectacle. Sheets checked, blessed, even paraded. It doesn't happen here, but the possibility of being noticed is worse than being watched. You fold yourself beneath the blanket. The man who is now your husband follows. His movements are careful, quiet. He does not touch you. Not yet. Perhaps not tonight. Historians continue to argue over how literal these customs truly were. Were the witnesses real or imagined? Was the pressure implied or enforced? Some records describe bedding ceremonies with unsettling precision. Others dismiss them as exaggerations, cautionary tales told by gossiping mouths to wide-eyed girls. You wonder which story you are in. The candle flutters. The blanket shifts. The house exhales. And in the darkness, you wait wondering whether this is the end of your wedding day or just the beginning of something quieter. The house wakes late the next morning, or perhaps it only feels that way because you never really slept. The air is thick with the scent of old ashes and boiled millet. Your back aches from the unfamiliar mattress, and your neck is stiff from lying too still. You listen for signs of life. Footsteps, coughs, the scrape of a pot. They come slowly, as if the walls themselves are waiting to see what kind of woman rose from that wedding bed. When you emerge, wrapped tightly in your shawl, the world greets you without ceremony. Your mother-in-law offers a bowl of broth. No words, just the bowl. She nods, perhaps more to herself than to you. Her eyes flick briefly toward the stairs, then back to her stitching. Whatever proof she needed, she seems to have found it, or decided it is no longer her concern. Others avoid your gaze, not out of shame, but out of custom. The bride the day after is a figure half real, half symbolic. She has passed through a door, and it would be impolite to comment on what she found on the other side. You sip the broth slowly. It is too salty, or perhaps your mouth is still too dry to judge. Your husband enters the room with a small, wordless nod. He does not sit next to you, but near enough that it's understood you are now part of the same household rhythm. You chew your bread. He ties his boots. You do not speak. It is, in its way, a shared act. Later, you are handed a broom. Not as punishment, not as test, simply as a reminder. Life continues. The floor must be swept. The dough must be kneaded. The hens do not care that you are now a wife. They squawk with the same indifference, their feathers puffed and their moods foul. And so the days begin to layer over each other. You rise before the sun. You milk, you chop, you fetch. You learn the tempo of this house, the sharp rhythm of your mother-in-law's cough before she critiques your stitching, the slow exhale your husband gives before discussing repairs, the particular way the gate creaks when someone arrives with news. It becomes a kind of language, one you're learning by immersion. Still, everything feels slightly too large or too small. The sleeves of your work dress bunch in the wrong places. Your scarf slips. The wooden spoon you use feels unfamiliar in your grip. You are moving through someone else's patterns, trying not to make ripples. And then, nearly a week later, you are sent back to your family. Not alone, of course. A cousin walks with you, ostensibly for protection, though more likely for witness. A woman returning to her childhood home must do so with dignity, and a chaperone ensures there are no unexpected confessions or unblessed tears. The walk is longer than you remember. A field scene barer, the trees less forgiving. The house appears suddenly at the bend in the path, exactly the same but smaller. The door opens. Your mother stands there with a look that is neither joy nor sorrow, just recognition. Your father remains seated, as he always does, a sign of formality or perhaps fatigue. Inside, the fire is burning too low. You are offered a seat near it and a small plate of something warm. You eat it without tasting. Your siblings, if they are present, hover nearby but do not approach. You are different now. You belong to another name. There is a ritual here, too. You are handed a piece of dough and pointed toward the hearth. No one explains, but you know what is expected. You bake a small round of bread. If it rises, they say, your marriage will be smooth. If it flattens, perhaps your husband snores or the in-laws will prove unkind. It rises slightly lopsided, and someone makes a quiet joke about stubborn ovens. This visit is not for comfort. It is a formal gesture, a confirmation that you are adjusting. The conversation stays light. The questions remain safe. You nod in all the right places. Your mother presses something into your hand as you leave a folded bit of cloth, perhaps scented with rosemary, perhaps simply old. She does not kiss you goodbye. On the walk back, your cousin talks endlessly about unrelated things. A pig that escaped during last week's storm, the cost of shoes, a girl in the next village who was caught stealing eggs and claimed she was looking for snakes. You nod, smile when appropriate, and think about how your family's house already feels like memory. Soft at the edges, distant. Historians still debate how central a bride's natal family remained after marriage. In some regions, daughters returned often bringing children, recipes, and news. In others, they vanished from their birth homes, absorbed entirely into their husband's household. Some scholars argue that the degree of connection depended less on law and more on harvests, distance, and how many spoons the new kitchen possessed. You return to your new home just as the sun is beginning to drop behind the trees. The door creaks. A pot bubbles. Your mother-in-law glances up, then resumes her knitting. The broom is leaning where you left it. Your place at the table is still empty. Waiting. You take it. Nothing has changed, and yet everything has. You sit a little straighter. Your spoon feels more natural now. You know where the cups are kept without asking. And for the first time, you speak before being spoken to. Your hands no longer feel like your own. They've grown stiff from kneading, chapped from scrubbing, and smart with little cuts earned from chores too small to name. The wool bites at your wrists when you card it. The bucket's wooden handle bruises the same spot on your palm each time you carry it from the well. Still, you work without complaint. Complaints hang in the air like smoke lingering, unwelcome, impossible to sweep away. The chores arrive without announcement. You rise before the rooster and sleep long after the embers turn to ash. You feed the chickens, rinse the pots, sort beans from rocks with the edge of your fingernail. You are praised only through absence. No correction means good enough. Sometimes that is all a woman can hope for. Soon, a new task arrives. Your husband's cousin is short-handed. One of the tannery workers slipped and sliced a deep cut through his palm. The wound festered, and now there's talk of fever. The cousin appears at your door one morning with a question that is not a question. Someone must help. It will be only for a few days. He looks at your husband when he says this, not at you. Your husband nods. And so you go. The tannery lives at the edge of the village. It always has. It is not a place people pass through casually. The smell finds you before the gate, pungent, eye-watering, something between rotting meat and river mud. It clings to everything: stone, wood, skin, thought. You breathe through your mouth and try not to look too closely at the tubs. They set you to scraping. The hides are already soaked, the hair loose, but the work is still hard. The blade you're handed is dull and wet. You pull it across hide after hide, stripping away what once was fur, then flesh, until only future leather remains. The stench soaks into your fingers and settles behind your ears. You try not to gag. Everyone else pretends not to notice. You work from morning until the shadow of the wall reaches the last row of barrels. No one thanks you. No one comments on your pace. They simply nod when you finish and hand you a cloth to wipe your hands. It smells faintly of last month's soap and something sour. You return home with the scent still trailing you. Your mother-in-law squints when you enter and tells you to leave your shoes by the door. She says it like it's a question, but it's not. You comply. The scent remains. The tannery is not a punishment, but it is not a privilege either. It is a gap that needed filling, and you were near. You return each morning without being told. The cousin stops checking whether you'll show up. You do. You always do. In the days that follow, your skin begins to toughen. The blisters harden. The ache in your shoulders becomes familiar. You learn the rhythm of scraping. You learn to move quickly between vats. You learn not to flinch at the sight of a cow's eye, still clinging to the underside of a skull. The others no longer glance at you sideways. You are part of the landscape now. No one says it, but you know. People talk. The village has begun to notice. A woman working in the tannery is not unheard of, but it is enough to raise eyebrows. You feel it in the way the baker's wife asks if your bread still rises with all that leather dust under your nails. You hear it when a group of boys whisper too loudly behind you. And you see it in the face of the neighbor who smiles with her mouth and nowhere else. But the tannery pays, not in coin, but in scrap soft leather already tanned, already trimmed, usable, valuable. Your husband doesn't complain. He sharpens a knife and begins fashioning pouches, a sheath for his awl, new soles for his boots. Your mother-in-law says nothing, though you notice she stores her best needle in one of the scraps. In some parts of Europe, laws required tanners to bury their waste deep enough to keep scavengers away, not because of disease, but because of shame. Too many bones scattered in the field said too much about your business. You think of this as you help haul a heavy pail of slop beyond the fence. You wonder how deep a scent can travel. Historians still discuss the roles of women in industries like tanning. Some argue they were present more often than records admit, their labor hidden behind male names. Others suggest their presence was rare, a signal of hardship or desperation. Either way, the parchment of history leaves more blank space than ink where your kind is concerned. You do not dwell on this. You scrub your hands raw each night. You hang your shift by the door. You smile politely when the butcher's daughter comments on your strong arms, though you know it's not meant kindly. One evening, as you pass the square, a woman calls out a greeting that ends in a laugh. You smile and wave. You say nothing. Later, at home, you tell your husband the vats are running low and the lime has begun to freeze in the corners. He says the cousin mentioned it too. Then he passes you a bowl of stew and eats without further comment. You eat too. The taste is muted, but not unpleasant. The scent of leather is still in your nose, but you're beginning to notice it less. You wake with the scent of lye still clinging to your fingernails, and for a moment, you forget where you are. The ceiling beams overhead look unfamiliar in the morning dim, until you remember again that this is your home now. The air is quiet, but not the good kind. It's the kind that follows a dropped bowl or a snapped thread. You sit up slowly, the cold floor nipping at your soles as you listen for what's missing. The chickens are still clucking. The fire's still breathing its low, steady breath. But something is off, and then it clicks. The bell is not ringing. Every morning, a church bell stirs the village like a rooster made of iron and rope. But not today. Outside, there is fog thick enough to drown in, and the sound never comes. You're halfway through dressing when the knock arrives, rapid, offbeat, urgent. It's a neighbor, red-cheeked and breathless. The priest's apprentice is missing, he says, and so is the bell rope. Stolen, perhaps, or simply snapped. He doesn't wait for questions, just mutters something about bad omens and damp ground, then disappears down the path, leaving only muddy prints and worry. You wrap yourself tighter and head outside. The fog sits low on the village like a blanket no one asked for. Shapes blur at the edges, and voices sound closer than they are. The chapel looks strange in this light, less sacred and more abandoned. A few people have gathered at the threshold, speaking in hushed tones as if not to disturb the air. By midday, the apprentice returns soaked, pale, and with a swollen eye. No one asks too many questions. He says he tripped while fetching firewood near the edge of the wood. He says the bell rope frayed from age. He says these things as if he believes them. The villagers nod. The priest blesses him. Life continues. But you notice, in the days that follow, how your husband sharpens his knives more often, and how your mother-in-law leaves sprigs of rosemary above the doorframe, which no one acknowledges. You start to recognize the language of unspoken fears. Superstition, in a place like this, is not whimsy, it's currency. You remember this as you sweep the kitchen, your broom tracing signs in the dust without meaning to. You find yourself knocking on wood twice before tasting milk. spitting over your shoulder when a black hen crosses the path, tucking a coin beneath your heel on market day. You don't believe in these things, but you do them. One night during supper, your husband mentions the word murrin. The room goes still. It's an old word, thick with the weight of past famines and sick cattle. He's heard whispers, he says, that a nearby village lost all their sheep in a week. The priest says it's bad grazing. The merchant blames the stars. Your husband just shrugs and drinks his ale. That night, you dream of cows with clouded eyes and fields that steam under moonlight. You wake with your jaw clenched and your hands balled into fists. The next morning, your mother-in-law sends you to the herb woman's hut, not for healing, but for salt and fennel. When you arrive, the old woman greets you by name, though you've never met. Her hut is low and crooked, like it's curtsing permanently. Inside, the air is warm and heavy with strange sweet smoke. She gives you what you came for, and then she presses a scrap of cloth into your palm. It's blue, embroidered faintly with thread you almost mistake for gold. For your pantry, she says. Hang it by the flower. Keeps the weevils out. You nod and thank her. You do not ask why it's scented with lavender and wormwood. You hang it by the flower. In parts of medieval Europe, kitchens were known to be protected by charms woven cords, herb bundles, carved spoons with symbols scratched into the handles. Some of these customs bled into the rites of marriage, too. A bride might tuck nettles into the mattress to ward off bad dreams. Bread might be baked with 7 grains on the 7th day. Sometimes, traditions survive not because they are believed, but because they are remembered. Historians still debate whether these practices were spiritual or merely psychological, whether they served religious function or simply soothed a weary mind. Some argue that they were the quiet resistance of women against a world they could not control. Others call them cultural clutter beautiful, useless, and fading fast. You stir the stew slowly that evening, watching it bubble and pop like a language of its own. The house is silent, but not tense. Your husband has gone to check the fences. Your mother-in-law is mending a cloak with precise, irritated stitches. You feel the weight of the amulet in your pocket and think of the herb woman's half-smile. Outside, the fog is gone. The bell rings again in the distance, clear and ordinary. You exhale. Whatever storm passed through seems to have moved on. But still, when you sweep, you pause near the door and draw a quick sign in the ash with the broom's tip. You don't believe it means anything, and yet you do it anyway. By now, the days have settled into a pattern tight, predictable, worn like the path between house and well. You know when the bread should rise, when the goats begin to complain, when the hens go quiet before laying. Your feet no longer hesitate in the dark, and your hands reach for tools before your mind finishes naming them. You are, as they say, becoming of the house. But being of the house does not mean being at rest. It means your life now turns like a wheel spinning forward with or without your permission. And then comes Sunday. In theory, it's a day of rest. In practice, it's simply a different kind of work. You wake earlier than usual. You wash your face with colder water. You brush your hair until your arms ache and pin it back in a way that says humble but not neglected. You choose your best shift, the one without stains, with embroidery so faint only another woman would notice, and you pray it won't rain. Your husband polishes his boots with too much care for someone who claims not to care. Your mother-in-law sharpens her tongue, and you ready your face. Not a mask, exactly, but something practiced, something soft around the edges, designed to say, yes, I'm thriving. No, nothing is wrong. The church bell rings, and you step outside, blinking into the light. The path to the chapel winds through the village like a shared breath. Others join it slowly, some in twos, some in clusters, none in solitude. You are greeted, nodded at, sized up. The baker's wife compliments your kerchief. A miller's daughter stares at your boots. You nod back with just enough grace to be unremarkable. The chapel is smaller than you remembered. It smells of damp stone and old tallow. The pews groan beneath familiar bodies. The priest begins his sermon. You do not hear most of it. Your ears are busy catching whispers. Your eyes flick between faces. It is here, on this day, that social standings are measured with greater precision than grain or wool. Your place in the village is still being decided, and Sunday is the ledger. After the service, people linger. There is a kind of unspoken marketplace that follows prayer, a trading of news, glances, minor grievances, and boasts. Your husband speaks with a reeve about roof repairs. Your mother-in-law discusses herbs with the widow who sells soap. You hover nearby, neither included nor excluded, present but unmentioned. And then a woman with narrow eyes and polished boots approaches. She introduces herself as the reeve's cousin, here for the season, and asks too sweetly how you find married life. You smile. You give the approved answers. She tilts her head. She says she's heard your bread doesn't rise quite as high as your sister's did. You smile again, tighter this time. She offers you a ribbon for your hair, though the color is too pale for your skin. You accept it with both hands. This, too, is part of the ritual. Women test each other not through blades, but through barbs hidden in lace. A misplaced compliment here, a pointed story there. The stronger your spine, the subtler the attack. You begin to see the patterns forming around you, like embroidery stitched in air. At home, you hang the ribbon near the hearth, not in use, but not discarded either. You stew over her words while peeling turnips, replay her smile while feeding the hens. And that night, you ask your husband lightly, casually, what he thinks of the reeve's cousin. He says she talks too much. You sleep more soundly than usual. Over time, these small interactions shape your standing more than anything you say outright. A kind word from the alewife can shield you from 3 petty rumors. A shared recipe from a respected matron earns you silence when you slip and call the rooster by your brother's name. And then one day, the unexpected arrives, an invitation. Not from a friend, you don't yet have those, but from the midwife. She's hosting a gathering for the feast of St. Agnes. Women only, she tells your mother-in-law. New wives should come. Bring something sweet. So you do. You bake honey cakes that crumble too easily. You tie your hair back with the pale ribbon. You arrive late enough not to seem eager. The gathering is small, smoky, and louder than you'd guessed. Laughter spills from the cottage like spilled cider. You are welcomed with mild curiosity. Someone compliments your hands rough. Yes, but capable. Someone else asks if you sing. You do not. They laugh. It doesn't sting. Much. During the meal, someone mentions an old tradition that if a bride sneezes during her first feast of St. Agnes, she'll bear twins. You fake a sneeze, and the room erupts. Laughter, light and real. You smile, real and light. Some scholars dismiss such customs as nonsense, village superstition. Others suggest these traditions offered women rare spaces of community-coded knowledge, passed under the guise of humor. Historians still argue. Were these feasts subversive sanctuaries, or just sanctioned distractions? You don't care. For once, no one's asking about your bread or your womb. You sip warm cider. You laugh at a joke you don't fully understand. And when you leave, someone presses a bit of beeswax into your hand. For your boots, they say. It smells like lavender and a little like approval. Back home, your husband asks how it was. You say it was fine. Then you set the beeswax on the shelf and smile to yourself in the candlelight. Some rituals are for worship. Others are for survival. The cold arrives without ceremony. One morning, you step outside, and the air bites differently sharper, thinner, scented with frost and chimney smoke. The fields, once soft with damp earth, harden beneath your boots. The hens puff themselves into feathered spheres. Water freezes in the buckets if left unattended. Winter has come, not with snow, but with silence. Inside, the work changes. Less gathering, more mending. Less planting, more preserving. You spend hours by the hearth, drying herbs, cutting strips of meat to hang from the rafters, reweaving wool into something passable for warmth. The men talk of roof tiles and firewood. The women talk of sickness and saints. You find your place among them, not at the center, but not on the edge either. You are learning how to listen without intruding, how to contribute without leading. It is a dance you never auditioned for, but one you must perform all the same. Still, despite the routines, a certain strangeness clings to you. You are not quite a daughter of this house, not quite its mistress, not quite invisible. Your hands are calloused, your chores complete, your voice gentle. But there is always something else, something lingering just behind people's eyes, something that whispers, "She was not born here." And then one evening, your husband's cousin arrives with a question, not to you never directly, but to your husband. They're drawing up records for the grain leases, he says. Can you read? The question hangs like breath in cold air. There is a pause almost too long. Then your husband answers calmly, as if recalling something of no great importance, that you can tally weights, and once did your father's books. That's true, of course. Your father taught you to read numbers, a little Latin, not for love of letters, but because mistakes cost coin. A daughter who could track an account saved her father's purse. The cousin nods, satisfied. You're assigned the grain tallies. Quietly, without fuss, your role shifts. A few days later, a wax tablet appears beside the bread. A stylus, too. You're not told what to do, but then you never are. You find yourself kneeling beside the storage room, counting sacks of barley, beans, and oats, pressing neat rows of numbers into soft wax. It is not glorious work, but it is exact. It is remembered. Each morning, before the frost softens, you tally weights. Names, bets, notes about sacks that split or grain lost to damp. Soon, people begin asking for you, quietly, with glances first to your husband, then to you. You're the one who remembers what was promised, what was delivered. You become the ledger that doesn't forget. You are not thanked, but the nods are firmer now, the greetings warmer. Your name is spoken with fewer sideways glances. Literacy among medieval women was rare, but not unheard of. Especially in wealthier peasant households, a literate daughter might serve as scribe, clerk, even informal steward when needed. Records survive of women who signed with crosses or symbols, or, rarely, full names marks left behind like fingerprints on parchment. You don't think about that. You think about the numbers, about how satisfying it feels when a row of tallies lines up straight. You like the quiet order of it all the way it stays put, even when everything else shifts. In some manners, a woman who kept accurate accounts might receive a token at Christmastide. A beeswax candle, a dried orange, a twist of sugar. Not wages, exactly, but something sweeter. Recognition in the language of light and scent. You don't expect anything, but one day, your mother-in-law leaves her sewing beside your seat, the good needle still tucked through the cloth. An invitation, perhaps, or a kind of peace treaty. You take it, and that evening, your husband sets a new candle beside your bowl. He doesn't say why. He doesn't need to. You light it slowly, watching the flame catch, steady and golden, just enough to read by. And for the first time, you feel yourself settled, not as a bride, not as a guest, but as someone who is needed. The fire hums. The walls hold still. The cold taps gently at the window, but does not enter. You press another number into wax, and the house breathes around you. As the days shrink and the sun rolls lower across the sky, the village moves inward. The roads grow quieter. The market stalls thin out. Even the dogs bark less. Inside, everything smells of smoke and vinegar and boiled turnips. You wear your shawl from dawn until long after the candles are snuffed. With the quiet comes the shift in pace tasks done slower, conversations held longer, and more time for watching. People watch how others spend the dark months. Who saves their stores? Who runs out of salt? Who's too thin by January? Eyes linger more in winter, and you've learned how to keep your movements steady beneath their weight. One morning, you're summoned. Not urgently, but pointedly. The Reeves wife is taken ill, and your mother-in-law volunteers you as a helper. It's a kindness, she says, though her tone makes it sound more like repayment. You wrap your scarf twice and set out before the frost softens. The Reeves house is larger, but colder. Inside, the fire burns low, and the walls echo. You're greeted by a maid with red eyes and instructions. Linen to be boiled, soup to be strained, feet to be rubbed with warmed oil. You do not flinch. You roll up your sleeves. The Reeves wife lies beneath 3 quilts, pale and murmuring. Fever, they say, or damp lungs. No one says plague. Not yet. You watch her sleep, the skin around her eyes like parchment. Her breathing rasps like wind through dry grass. You ladle broth with one hand and hold her wrist with the other, counting her pulse the way your father once taught you. At some point, you notice her gaze sharpening. She asks your name, not because she's forgotten, but because she wants to hear you say it. You do. She nods. Then, out of nowhere, she asks if you know how to card wool. You blink, then nod. Good, she whispers. They'll ask. She sleeps again. You card the wool. As the week drags on, she drifts in and out. You keep working. You scrub the floor with vinegar. You coax warmth into her tea with dried thyme. You smooth the covers each time they twist. And gradually, your name begins to travel. At the bakery, the girl with flour-stained sleeves greets you differently. At the well, a boy you've never met offers to fill your bucket. Nothing grand, just tiny pivots in the way the village turns. Winter has many kinds of currency, and quiet competence is one of them. Then comes the visit. You're called to the midwives again, but not for herbs this time. A group of women gather in her hut, their chatter barely contained by the smoke-stained rafters. They welcome you with a nod. Someone pours cider. Someone else produces a handful of wool. They say it simply. They're starting a blanket. You know what it means. A communal blanket, pieced together by many hands, each square stitched by a different woman. They're not given out lightly. Each one is a patchwork of effort, memory, and unspoken contracts. They last generations passed down, tucked into trousseaux, wrapped around colicky babies. If your square is accepted, it means you belong. You pick up the needle. It feels heavier than usual. Your stitches are careful, cautious. You don't try to impress. You just try to be exact. As you sew, the women talk not loudly, but comfortably. They speak of boys with frozen fingers, of spoons gone missing, of the priest's mule that refuses to be ridden. Jokes come in sideways, laughter soft like felt. No one explains the customs. They assume you'll learn by doing. In some parts of medieval Europe, winter gatherings like this, known as spinning bees or candle evenings, were the social heart of rural life. Women sewed, spun, sang, and traded news. And though outsiders often dismissed them as gossip circles, modern scholars suggest they were crucial to forming female alliances. Some even argue these evenings formed the foundation of informal power structures among village women. Historians still debate whether such gatherings offered real agency or just the illusion of inclusion. But you don't care. You're here. You're sewing. The woman next to you offers a sliver of quince. You finish your square. It's a little crooked. You offer it anyway. The midwife takes it, turns it once in her hand, then nods. She threads it onto the growing blanket. Later that night, at home, you tell your husband you helped with wool. He grunts approvingly. Your mother-in-law doesn't ask questions, but you notice she moves her thimble a little closer to your place at the table. The house breathes with a new rhythm. The wind still claws at the shutters, and the fire still needs stoking, but something has shifted. You lie down that night and realize you're no longer trying to prove you belong. You're simply here. And tomorrow, someone else will bring thread. By the time the frost begins to loosen its grip, you've learned to gauge the time of day by the color of the smoke. Morning smoke is pale and hurried. Afternoon smoke is thicker and lazier. And evening smoke curls slow and blue against the sky like a lullaby. You don't think about these things as you did when you first arrived. They simply live in your muscles now, alongside the sound of grain being milled and the creak of floorboards at dawn. But with the slow return of warmth comes another cycle, the visits. Married women, especially new ones, are expected to make rounds. Not all at once, not formally, but steadily. A morning at the baker's, an afternoon helping shell beans at the Reeves', a quiet hour beside a weaving frame. These aren't chores exactly, and they're not quite social either. They're observation wrapped in hospitality. You are being watched as you work assessed not for skill, but for shape. How well you blend. How much you require explaining. You're sent to assist Mistress Aline first. Widow, landholder, and woman of faintly terrifying repute. She lives in a house set slightly apart, with windows too clean and a goose that patrols the yard like a guard. When you arrive, she eyes you as if measuring a bolt of cloth. I've a loom that needs checking, she says, and honey to pour. You've got fingers, I presume? You nod. She snorts, then sets you to work. The loom is dusty but sound. You dust it. You sort her spindles. She doesn't hover. Occasionally, she mutters. Once, she praises your knots. You nearly miss it. At midday, she serves you onion broth and insists you sit. The table is scrubbed smooth, the spoon already set. She asks about your mother, not in sentiment, but in structure. Where was she from? Did she keep bees? How many daughters? You answer simply. She nods, then offers a fact of her own. She once broke a man's nose with a wooden spoon. He called me Henwood, she explains, sipping her broth. You laugh, carefully. She doesn't. Not funny. He bled on my floor. Later, she shows you her garden. It's too early for planting, but the soil has been turned. She tells you where the moles come from, where the sun hits best, where not to plant parsnips unless you enjoy curses. You nod again. You don't ask for explanation. Before you leave, she hands you a bundle of dried rosemary. For the washroom, she says, or your pillow, or a drawer. It chases what doesn't belong. You thank her. She closes the door before you finish. That evening, you hang the rosemary beside your shift. The scent lingers sharp, clean, not unpleasant. In some villages, women like Mistress Aline were unofficial custodians of social history keepers of unrecorded truths, dispensers of quiet power. They never held titles, but their names carried weight. And for new brides, earning their regard was both test and right. Historians still debate the actual influence such women wielded. Were they gatekeepers or simply relics of older matrilineal traditions? Did they offer protection or reinforce hierarchy under a different name? You don't dwell on it. You sleep better that night. Soon after, the visits multiply. You patch a tear in a priest's stole. You help dye cloth at the weaver's. You're asked to sing, which you don't, but your hum is tolerated. Each visit adds a stitch to your standing. You begin to hear your name passed along in whispers neutral, then fond. Sometimes it's paired with steady or decent. Once, someone calls you capable, and you feel it like a ribbon pinned to your sleeve. A quirky detail. One house you visit has a carved wooden chicken nailed above the doorframe. The woman tells you it's for luck, or maybe to keep foxes from the dreams. She isn't sure. It's been there longer than her marriage. You smile, not because you understand, but because understanding is less important than acknowledging. At the end of each day, you return home, the stories of other households clinging to your sleeves like burrs. Your mother-in-law watches you more closely now, as if trying to trace the places you've been by scent alone. She never asks, but she leaves the hearth to you more often. And once, when your bread rises high and evenly, she says nothing but tears the first piece for you. You begin to move differently through the house, not cautiously, but with a kind of quiet permission. You sweep without being told. You correct your husband's sons when they don't add. You pluck the dead leaves from the windowsill plants before anyone else notices. And then one morning, you find a gift. A pair of wool mitts, not new, but mended with care. No note, just folded neatly beside your seat. You wear them the next time you go visiting. No one mentions them. But one woman touches your wrist as you leave and says, "You've settled in well." Then she adds, "It's not easy." You smile. Not broadly. Just enough. The breeze is warmer now. The geese have stopped their shrieking. The paths are drier. You keep walking. It begins with a knock, not urgent, not polite, but somewhere in between. You open the door to find a boy from 2 houses over. Feet muddy, breath visible in the morning chill. "They need you at the hall," he says, as though that explains anything. You set down your apron, wipe your hands, follow. At the manor house, there is the kind of hush that happens before decisions. A few other villagers are gathered, your husband among them, a handful of older men, and to your surprise, Mistress Aline. The steward is speaking, his voice clipped, the way people speak when quoting someone more important. The Lord is away, but there's business to be done. Land to be remeasured, dues to be tallied, inventories to be confirmed. You're here for the tallies. They hand you a sheaf of records numbers, weights, parcels of land named for streams and rocks. You're told to help the steward's clerk. You're not introduced. You are expected. The clerk is pale, young, and already annoyed. You're polite. He drops ink on his cuff. You wait. He sighs. You correct his math. Soon, you're the one reading the tallies aloud. Your voice is steady. Your hands are clean. The clerk stops correcting you. It takes hours. The room's cold, and the fire smokes. At some point, Mistress Aline hands you a boiled egg and mutters, "Eat." You do. When the ink dries and the scroll is tied, no one says thank you. But the steward nods once, as if filing your name away under useful. Later, as you walk home, the sky purples with the early dark. You think about how no one told you that being good with numbers might mean being called to the manor, or how the clerk looked surprised when you knew where Forbrook Field lay. In medieval England and beyond, some women, especially literate ones, found themselves pulled into estate management in ways both formal and unacknowledged. A wife might serve as steward in her husband's absence. A widow might oversee multiple households. Records exist of women balancing accounts, overseeing grain storage, even testifying in disputes over land boundaries. Scholars debate whether these instances were exceptions or unspoken norms. Was the literate wife an anomaly or simply too useful to be ignored? Was her role respected or quietly resented? You don't know. What you do know is that the steward has seen your handwriting, and that carries weight. At home, your mother-in-law eyes your inky fingers, says nothing. Your husband asks what happened at the hall. You explain. He listens. Then, without thinking, he says, "Maybe next time you can help with the orchard ledger." You blink. He doesn't mean it as a compliment. Just a fact. But you tuck it away like a silver coin in your apron. That evening, you clean your stylus and wax tablet with more care than usual. You sharpen the edge, polish the cover. It feels like a small act of defiance, or maybe simply pride. The next morning, the village begins to thaw. The mud returns. The chickens dig furiously in the yard, like treasure hunters. You're asked to help calculate seed weight for the spring planting. Someone leaves a roll of soft cloth on your bench unused, unrequested. You nod when you receive it. You don't ask who it's from. In one house, you find a child mimicking your tallying with a stick and some cold porridge. She grins when you catch her. You smile back, then show her how to make a real row of marks. Quirky detail. In some households, tally sticks were kept tucked in beams above doorways, believed to carry luck if carved on a waxing moon. You've seen two, now one shaped like a rabbit's ear, the other with a carved fish. No one talks about them, but you see them. Your days stretch longer with the light. You begin helping at the market, noting what's sold and what's bartered. You notice who always haggles too hard, who gives extra to the widow with thin shoes, who sneaks a plum when no one watches. You're not just seen now, you're relied on. That night, your husband lights the fire while you write out a rough list of the sheep's feed. He glances over, mused. "You're worse than the clerk," he says. You don't correct him. You press your stylus to the wax, and the marks glide smoothly. You don't think about what they mean. You think about how much lighter the stylus feels in your hand. Outside, the moon is almost full. Inside, your place is quiet, steady, and entirely your own. Spring doesn't arrive in a single burst, but in hesitant footfalls, mud softening beneath your shoes, buds nosing out from wood long thought dead, and the hens laying with just a bit more insistence. The air carries a new sharpness, not from cold, but from possibility. And you find yourself waking before the rooster, listening to the sounds of a house stretching itself into a new season. The floor is still cold, the fire still stubborn, but something underneath it all has begun to move again. With spring comes the reckoning of linens, an annual ceremony without song or priest, but one as sacred as any. Everything must be beaten, aired, scrubbed, stitched every corner of the house, reminded it is still alive. You're given the broom like a scepter, and spend days waging war against cobwebs that seem to regenerate faster than you can sweep. The windows are unlatched and thrown wide, and the dust dances joyfully in sunbeams, mocking your efforts, but confirming winter's exile. As the weather warms, your name begins to surface in new conversations, sometimes as a solution, sometimes as a story. You're invited now, expected to more gatherings now. Not formal invitations, just casual remarks that carry the weight of obligation. Perhaps she'll come help with the herbs. Or, it's a good day for the barley inventory. She's quick with the weights. You move between households with increasing fluidity, trading hands for tasks. Your presence no longer novel, but gently assumed, as though you've always been here, woven into the fabric between hearth and hayloft. But the closer you are drawn into the center, the more visible you become. At the market, as you barter for wool thread, you catch a tone just a sliver of sharpness wrapped in honey. A woman nearby, not quite looking at you, remarks that some girls seem to rise quickly when there are plenty of books in their dowry. The words float over the crowd, light as smoke, but heavy in meaning. And though no one laughs, the silence that follows feels complicit. You do not answer. You do not need to. The market always remembers. In tight-knit medieval villages, where movement was rare and roles even rarer, women who adapted swiftly or visibly could invite admiration and suspicion in equal measure. To know your numbers was to be clever. To use them was to risk being called proud. Scholars still debate whether such attention marked influence or threatened it. Was the capable wife admired for her service or scrutinized for her ambition? Was she building trust or stepping beyond her station? You return home with the thread, but the words from the market cling to your shawl like ash. You brush them off slowly, folding your chores around the silence. That evening, when your husband mentions the orchard ledgers, you nod, saying nothing, but your grip tightens slightly on the edge of the table. You are not angry, just aware. Later in the week, a younger wife invites you to a Beltane gathering. Nothing grand. She says just herbs and bread and a bit of singing. You accept, though part of you hesitates. You still carry the residue of the market's coldness, and gatherings, while wrapped in warmth and flower dust, can also carry subtle edges. But the evening is golden and soft, and the gathering is quiet in the way old songs are quiet, full of depth, but gentle on the surface. Beneath a budding hawthorn tree, you sit among other women, their skirts spread like petals, their laughter woven with wind. They pass around cider in wooden cups and press herbs into one another's hands, naming them with quiet reverence yarrow for courage, rosemary for memory, mugwort for dreams. Someone begins a song you don't know, and though you cannot join, you hum along beneath your breath, letting the tune warm your ribs. A leaf is tucked behind your ear, its edges smelling faintly of lemon and old stories. A woman beside you offers a sliver of cheese wrapped in nettle. She says it brings luck, or at least better dreams. You eat it because refusing would mean explaining yourself, and tonight is not for explanations. In one household you visited earlier that week, you noticed a wooden chicken nailed above the doorframe. No one mentioned it, but when you asked why it faced east, the eldest daughter said, "Because foxes come from the west." You smiled, not because you believed it, but because belief has very little to do with power. In medieval homes, charms and tokens often protected not just bodies, but reputations, relationships, futures. A carved hen, a bent nail, a bell stitched into the hem of a sleeping gown, each one a quiet prayer with splinters. The women stay long after the sun dips, feeding the fire in turns, speaking not of husbands or weather, but of things with no tidy name. A dream of a lost tooth, a crow that landed twice on the same stone, a birthmark shaped like a tree. You listen more than you speak, but when the night begins to fold itself away, no one asks if you will come again. They assume you will. That, more than any invitation, tells you what has changed. You return home with herbs crushed in your pockets and smoke braided into your hair. Your husband is asleep already, a single candle still burning. You slip into bed without noise, and for the first time, you feel not just accepted, not just respected, but rooted. There are things no one tells you about spring in a village. The way mud finds its way into everything, the way birds nest precisely where you hope to dry laundry, and the way sudden sun can make every task feel both urgent and unfinished. You wake to lists you never wrote, and spend your days ticking through chores that seem to multiply as soon as you look away. But beneath the chaos, there's a rhythm, now a beat you no longer stumble over, a tempo that accepts your steps. The barley fields need walking, not tending, just eyes to spot what winter broke. You go, apron tucked, boots stiff from drying too close to the fire. Along the way, you pass neighbors with greetings that require no answers. A nod is enough. You've become one of those people, not new, not strange, just someone who belongs. Near the edge of the field, you see 3 stones arranged in a triangle deliberate, maybe ancient, maybe just the work of bored children. You don't touch them. Everyone knows better. In some villages, they say, disturbing such patterns invites a sleepless summer. You believe this not because it's proven, but because belief itself is a kind of shared survival. Back home, a cart's wheel has cracked, and the men are hauling it into the courtyard with much effort and even more complaint. You offer water, then step aside. It isn't your task, but no one minds your watching. As you lean near the doorframe, your mother-in-law appears beside you, and for the first time, speaks not about goats or firewood, but about the steward's visit next month. She mentions needing help with the kitchen tallies. She says it lightly, but her voice carries intent. You nod once. It's enough. In medieval households, bookkeeping was often a male duty, but when women took it on, they usually did so under the radar through cookery lists, supply tallies, and informal accounts. The division between domestic and managerial blurred easily when the ink was kept inside the home. Historians still debate whether this was a hidden form of empowerment or simply an extension of servitude under a more respectable name. You find yourself spending more time at the hearth table, not to stitch or prep onions, but to smooth parchment and tally dried goods. You use a slate for practice, scratched, smudged, but perfectly serviceable. The numbers come easily now, as if they've decided you're worth their time. Even your husband seems to trust your figures more than his memory, handing over scraps of paper with murmured estimates, asking you to just check if it makes sense. One morning, you overhear the blacksmith's wife speaking of you to another woman by the well. It's not flattery, but neither is it judgment. She says you're precise. Quiet, she adds, but not meek. The words float over the stone lip of the well and ripple inside your chest like thrown coins. You return home with wet skirts and a strange lightness, unsure whether to feel proud or merely seen. Pride feels dangerous, but being invisible feels worse. That evening, your mother-in-law is embroidering near the window. She doesn't look up when she speaks, but her words are clear. She says the linen inventory will fall to you this year. She says you'll need to check every trunk, every chest, every folded piece, not just count them, but assess their wear. She does not ask if you understand. She knows you do. You begin the next morning, lifting fabric from cedar-lined boxes, holding each piece up to the light, your hands moving not like a guest, not even like a daughter, but like someone with authority. You create a system: marks for fray, marks for stain, marks for softness. By dusk, your fingers are sore and your knees ache, but your list is full and clear. A quirky tradition creeps into memory as you fold the last of the linens. In some homes, women would stitch a single hair into each sheet never spoken of, but done all the same to mark the household as truly theirs. A strand of self hidden in the seams. You wonder, briefly, if any of these linens carry such markers. You wonder if your own hair has begun to tangle invisibly into the house. Your husband watches you at work, but says nothing. Later, as you sit by the fire, he sets down a small bundle beside you. A spool of fresh thread, a sliver of beeswax, and a folded square of cloth. You unfold it to find your own initials, embroidered clumsily but deliberately in one corner. You look at him. He shrugs. "We needed a new ledger cloth," he says. You smile, but do not laugh. You run your fingers over the stitches, tracing not the letters, but the spaces between them. The thread is uneven, the wax slightly soft, the cloth already curling at the edges, but it is yours, made not as a gift, but as an offering of place. As the fire dies down, you begin your next tally. And this time, you write your name first. You don't notice the subtle shift in status until it's already happened. One morning, a neighbor's child knocks to borrow a needle, and the knock is light, familiar, not the knock of someone seeking permission, but of someone certain you'll have what's needed. You give the needle, of course, and she scampers away before you can ask whose hem is unraveling. A moment later, your mother-in-law chuckles softly from the next room and remarks that you've become a stop on the village circuit, like the well or the cider press. It sounds like a joke, but it isn't. You are no longer watched in the same way. When you cross the courtyard with a basket, no one glances twice. When you speak at the table, no one waits for your husband to translate or confirm. And when someone is ill, it is you they call to sit by the hearth and watch the fever, not because you are a healer, but because you are, now, steady. You begin to see your own shadow stitched into village life. The barley you helped measure is being ground into flour. The ledger you started is now referenced aloud. Even your handwriting is recognizable. Your loops and angles noted with small, offhand comments. There's a weight to that, the feeling that your absence would leave a gap, not just a silence. Yet visibility comes with echoes. One afternoon, while you and the others are patching sacks for market, a woman you don't know well begins to talk about a bride from a neighboring village. The girl could read, she says, and was good with sums, but her in-laws sent her home after a year. Too clever by half, the woman says, laughing. No one wants a wife who counts your bread rolls. You don't respond. Someone glances at you, but only briefly. The moment passes like a sudden gust of wind noticed, then gone. In medieval households, intelligence in a bride could be both prized and problematic. Noble families sometimes sought literate wives for estate management, while in smaller communities, such skills could mark a woman as suspect or worse, as difficult. Historians still debate whether female literacy served to uplift women's roles or reinforced expectations of silent, unpaid labor cleverness without voice. You fold the last of the sacks and carry them to the porch. The sun has dropped behind the trees, but the sky still glows, a dusty blue that reminds you of worn cloth. On the way back inside, you catch sight of your own reflection in a basin of water. You pause, not out of vanity, but because the face looking back is one you don't quite remember becoming. The girl who arrived here wore nerves like jewelry. The woman in the basin wears something heavier and more permanent. In the kitchen, the scent of boiled onions and summer herbs wafts thick through the rafters. Your husband is chopping something with more effort than skill, and you take the knife from his hand before the turnip becomes unrecognizable. He doesn't argue. He leans on the table instead, watching you work. There's no performance in it anymore. He doesn't watch to assess, just to witness. A few nights later, you're asked to help host the feast for St. Audrey's Day. Not plan it, not yet, but assist. Arrange the herbs, slice the bread, portion out the ale with a kind of fairness that is noticed even when unspoken. You work beside women who used to speak around you, not to you. Now, they offer you the sharper knife, the better bowl, the corner spot where the wind doesn't reach. No one announces the change, but it is there. That feast goes off without a stumble. The ale is just enough. The bread stretches farther than expected. Even the beeswax candles last the whole evening, despite the breeze that sneaks through the door. A small, quiet custom unfolds afterward, something you'd only heard murmured before. The women who manage the feast are given tokens. A scrap of lace, a thimble, a strip of lavender wrapped in old parchment. Not gifts, not payment, just ... acknowledgement. A tradition older than memory and gentler than praise. You are handed a bundle wrapped in faded cloth. Inside is a single dried orange, pierced with cloves and bound in a ribbon that smells faintly of rosemary. You say thank you, but the woman who gives it to you only nods and moves on. Later, alone, you hold the orange in your palm and marvel at its weight. It is light, but it means something. There's a story you once heard of a bride who planted garlic in every corner of her garden, not to ward off spirits, but to mark where she'd stood when her voice went unheard. You never knew if it was true. But tonight, as you press the orange to your nose and breathe in its sun-soaked fragrance, you think, if it were you, you would have planted lavender instead. The house settles around you. The embers glow low. Your hands smell of citrus and cloves. You are not done becoming, but you are at last known. You don't notice the subtle shift in status until it's already happened. One morning, a neighbor's child knocks to borrow a needle, and the knock is light, familiar, not the knock of someone seeking permission, but of someone certain you'll have what's needed. You give the needle, of course, and she scampers away before you can ask whose hem is unraveling. A moment later, your mother-in-law chuckles softly from the next room and remarks that you've become a stop on the village circuit, like the well or the cider press. It sounds like a joke, but it isn't. You are no longer watched in the same way. When you cross the courtyard with a basket, no one glances twice. When you speak at the table, no one waits for your husband to translate or confirm. And when someone is ill, it is you they call to sit by the hearth and watch the fever, not because you are a healer, but because you are, now, steady. You begin to see your own shadow stitched into village life. The barley you helped measure is being ground into flour. The ledger you started is now referenced aloud. Even your handwriting is recognizable. Your loops and angles noted with small, offhand comments. There's a weight to that, the feeling that your absence would leave a gap, not just a silence. Yet visibility comes with echoes. One afternoon, while you and the others are patching sacks for market, a woman you don't know well begins to talk about a bride from a neighboring village. The girl could read, she says, and was good with sums, but her in-laws sent her home after a year. Too clever by half, the woman says, laughing. No one wants a wife who counts your bread rolls. You don't respond. Someone glances at you, but only briefly. The moment passes like a sudden gust of wind noticed, then gone. In medieval households, intelligence in a bride could be both prized and problematic. Noble families sometimes sought literate wives for estate management, while in smaller communities, such skills could mark a woman as suspect or worse, as difficult. Historians still debate whether female literacy served to uplift women's roles or reinforced expectations of silent, unpaid labor cleverness without voice. You fold the last of the sacks and carry them to the porch. The sun has dropped behind the trees, but the sky still glows, a dusty blue that reminds you of worn cloth. On the way back inside, you catch sight of your own reflection in a basin of water. You pause, not out of vanity, but because the face looking back is one you don't quite remember becoming. The girl who arrived here wore nerves like jewelry. The woman in the basin wears something heavier and more permanent. In the kitchen, the scent of boiled onions and summer herbs wafts thick through the rafters. Your husband is chopping something with more effort than skill, and you take the knife from his hand before the turnip becomes unrecognizable. He doesn't argue. He leans on the table instead, watching you work. There's no performance in it anymore. He doesn't watch to assess, just to witness. A few nights later, you're asked to help host the feast for St. Audrey's Day. Not plan it, not yet, but assist. Arrange the herbs, slice the bread, portion out the ale with a kind of fairness that is noticed even when unspoken. You work beside women who used to speak around you, not to you. Now, they offer you the sharper knife, the better bowl, the corner spot where the wind doesn't reach. No one announces the change, but it is there. That feast goes off without a stumble. The ale is just enough. The bread stretches farther than expected. Even the beeswax candles last the whole evening, despite the breeze that sneaks through the door. A small, quiet custom unfolds afterward, something you'd only heard murmured before. The women who manage the feast are given tokens: a scrap of lace, a thimble, a strip of lavender wrapped in old parchment. Not gifts, not payment, just ... acknowledgement. A tradition older than memory and gentler than praise. You are handed a bundle wrapped in faded cloth. Inside is a single dried orange, pierced with cloves and bound in a ribbon that smells faintly of rosemary. You say thank you, but the woman who gives it to you only nods and moves on. Later, alone, you hold the orange in your palm and marvel at its weight. It is light, but it means something. There's a story you once heard of a bride who planted garlic in every corner of her garden, not to ward off spirits, but to mark where she'd stood when her voice went unheard. You never knew if it was true. But tonight, as you press the orange to your nose and breathe in its sun-soaked fragrance, you think, if it were you, you would have planted lavender instead. The house settles around you. The embers glow low. Your hands smell of citrus and cloves. You are not done becoming, but you are at last known. There is a moment, days, or maybe weeks after the feast, when you notice something odd in the space between errands. It isn't silence exactly. The village hums as it always does, with bleating goats and creaking carts and gossip stretched between bread stalls. But underneath it, there's a kind of ... ease. You no longer rehearse your answers before speaking. You no longer measure your movements in borrowed grace. The role that once felt like a costume now clings like a second skin. The air turns warmer. Fields bloom with rough green promise. The elderberries blush along the road. You walk these paths now with a practiced eye, noting where fence posts need straightening or whose thatch has thinned too soon. These aren't your responsibilities, not officially, but you hold the knowledge anyway, like a quiet ledger behind your ribs. Your days are stitched with invisible thread measuring, tending, noticing. Not because someone told you to, because someone would notice if you didn't. One morning, while grinding barley, your sister-in-law mentions that the steward may ask for assistance with a census roll. She says it lightly, as though commenting on the weather, but you hear the test tucked beneath it. Without looking up, you say you wouldn't mind. She doesn't smile, but she nods. By midday, the scribe arrives. He's older than you expected and carries the tired look of someone who has squinted at too many ink-splotched parchments. He asks for help sorting names, weights, and dues. Your husband volunteers you with a kind of half-joke about your perfect little numbers, and you feel the flicker of pride buried under his grin. You sit with the steward for hours, correcting spellings, balancing columns, translating between units of measure that seem designed only to confuse. He says little, but by the end, he gives you the leftover parchment scraps and says they shouldn't go to waste. That is, high praise. In many medieval manors, local women sometimes assisted scribes, not just with household figures, but with community records. It was not always official. Names were rarely recorded. But behind every well-kept account, there was often an anonymous hand, small, firm, and ink-stained. Historians still debate whether these women shaped history from the margins, or merely kept it tidy for the men who claimed its authorship. You don't concern yourself with legacy. But that evening, when you copy out the old tallies for storage, you write your own name in the margin, not central, just there. A mark not for others to see, but for you to remember. That you were here. That you added something. As the sun begins to press longer shadows into the lane, preparations shift toward midsummer. Herbs are gathered. Bread is started. And beneath the surface, quiet arrangements begin. You hear it first from the weaver's daughter, that someone's niece is arriving soon, that there may be a marriage in the offing, and that the household will be watching closely. You remember your own arrival. How eyes weighed more than bread. How kindness came wrapped in scrutiny. You find yourself in small conversations you didn't expect to lead. One girl asks how you manage to remember all the herb names. Another wonders how you keep track of accounts without confusing the units. You answer simply. You don't pretend mastery. You speak like someone still learning, because you are. But they listen, and that changes everything. At midsummer, the household gathers near the field edge, where the elder tree leans like a crooked sentinel. There's a fire, of course, and laughter, and just enough ale to soften sharp tongues. But this year, you are not seated near the edge. You are past the jug without hesitation. You are asked to slice the honey cakes. And when a song begins that you half know, you hum the beginning and sing the rest. A curious custom resurfaces that night, something you'd heard once and forgot. In some villages, women placed a single silver pin into the midsummer fire, a quiet wish for the year ahead. Not for luck, exactly. More for clarity. You have no pin, but you pluck a rosemary sprig from your braid and toss it into the flames. No one sees. No one needs to. The fire crackles. Someone laughs. Your husband's hand finds yours beneath the blanket. He doesn't squeeze, just rest there, solid and warm. Around you, the world doesn't change. But within you, something settles into place. It's not arrival. That happened long ago. It's anchoring. The firelight flickers across faces you know now without thinking who likes what, who wakes early, who can't knead dough without humming. You are not thinking about duty. You are not worried about tomorrow's tallies. For the first time in what feels like years, you are simply present. And as the embers glow lower and the laughter shifts to soft farewells, you look up at the stars and realize you are no longer reaching for a place to belong. You are already inside it. There is a day late summer, just before the first leaves turn, when you wake to the smell of honey and damp wool. The windows are open. The wind carries dust and something faintly metallic, like the taste of old tools left in rain. The season is changing, though it pretends not to. You've learned to recognize these signals, not the grand flourishes of solstice, but the quieter shift shadows that stretch differently. The way the bread dough proves slower, the way your shawl feels necessary, even in the afternoon. This is the time of reckoning. Not the dramatic kind, but the practical kind. Grain stores are checked, cellars are swept. Every jar of jam is turned to ensure it hasn't clouded. You're given the task of reviewing the salt stock, which sounds simple until you realize there are 8 bins of different coarseness and no 2 measures alike. You sort them anyway, placing markers made from slivers of broken crockery, your own system, imprecise but consistent. In the corner of the storehouse sits a box of items that don't belong anywhere else. A copper spoon with a bent handle, a child's wooden toy with 1 wheel missing, 2 unmatched gloves. You pause there longer than you mean to. These are the misfits, the nearly losts, the once valueds. You close the box gently and mark it uncounted. Outside, the orchard bends under the weight of ripening pears. The bees hum with the kind of purpose you envy. And somewhere behind the house, someone is beating laundry against a stone. The rhythm is soothing, like a heartbeat slowed by trust. They send you to the parish house with a list. You're to fetch candle wax, vinegar, and an update on the water levy. You walk the familiar path past hedgerows, grown wild, and brambles that catch your skirt. The priest isn't in, but the old clerk hands you the jar of vinegar and mutters that the candles will be late, as always. As you turn to leave, he hesitates, then adds, "They say your household's accounts are the neatest this side of the river." His tone is not praise, exactly, but it isn't insult either. You thank him and step out into the lane, letting the heat settle on your shoulders like a warm blanket. In earlier centuries, most medieval brides were expected to assimilate quickly into the domestic rhythms of their new homes, with little room to redefine them. Yet scattered evidence shows some women, especially those with literacy or dowry weight, managed to shape household culture from within, quietly adjusting practices, introducing new efficiencies, or even keeping unofficial ledgers. Historians still debate whether these contributions were transformative or simply tolerated, an acceptable eccentricity within a rigid structure. You don't feel eccentric. You feel useful, and not just to the household. At market, people now ask your opinion on measures. Children wave when you pass. Even the midwife, who once ignored you completely, now shares weather signs and herbal warnings with you, as though your understanding is assumed. There's a small moment that afternoon, hardly more than a breath, when you pass the spinning room and hear someone humming the tune you sang at midsummer. Not loudly, just a thread of melody wound into the clack of spindles. You don't stop. You don't need to. The evening brings a sudden rain, loud against the roof and warm enough to feel welcome. You light the small candle your husband brought home last week, and the flame flickers with the rhythm of old stories. You sit at the table with a dull quill and a scrap of parchment, not because there is work to be done, but because it feels right. You write the date, then your name, then nothing else. Later, by the hearth, your mother-in-law knits in silence. Your sister-in-law shells peas. Your husband snores quietly with his boots still on. The fire pops, and no one flinches. The dog sighs. Everything holds. And though the rain thickens outside, and the roof may leak again, you know, with the quiet certainty that comes only after seasons of proving that you are not a guest here. You are not a lesson or a risk, or even a clever girl with sums in her head. You are just part of it. Of the noise, the work, the meals, the gossip, the faith, the failures, of the house, of the soil. The fire begins to die down, but you do not rush to feed it. You let it fade, as the evening does, in its own rhythm. You sit in the hush and think, not of where you came from or who you might have been, but only of the next thing to be mended, counted, or remembered. You are finally unremarkable in the most remarkable way. The fire has dwindled now, a faint glow in the heart of the hearth. Around you, the house breathes softly, timbers settling, coals sighing, a spoon forgotten in a bowl. Outside, the rain slows to a hush, as though even the clouds have begun to doze. You sit quietly, not out of duty, not out of fatigue, but because there is a deep calm in stillness earned. Your hands rest in your lap, fingers ink-stained, knuckles rough from work, but steady. The candle beside you flickers once, then steadies, its golden light dancing along the edge of the parchment. You don't write anything more tonight. There's no need. What matters most is already known, carried in memory, in muscle, in the silence of a house that has accepted you not as decoration, not as novelty, but as rhythm. There's comfort in knowing that not every mark must be made in ink. Some things, your kindness, your steadiness, your quiet cleverness, are recorded in the way others glance your way before choosing their words, in the confidence they place in your hands, in the names they speak softly when you pass. These, too, are ledgers of a kind. Tomorrow, the work begins again. Bread to knead, hens to coax, ledgers to balance. But for now, you lean back and listen to the quiet, to the rain, to the steady heartbeat of a life that fits. So sleep now, with the scent of wood smoke in your hair and the memory of clove orange still on your tongue. Let the seasons turn without urgency. Let the candle burn a little longer. Let your breath match the rhythm of the house. You are safe. You are settled. You are home.